Okay. All right. So we're on a little bit of delay here. We're having some technical issues. I appreciate you guys dealing with this. Zeb is out of town. He's gone on a trip to Disney with his family. And so I'm kind of handling it all myself here. I've run into he showed me how to run the show, but there were some technical issues that couldn't get resolved beforehand. And now I'm kind of like running the show without Zeb here. So bear with us for any technical issues we may or may not be having throughout the show. But with that being said, I want to get right into it. I'm joined again by Joe Aniello, Dr. Joe Aniello. And he's been on the show before, and we talked about management and leadership. So Joe, thank you for coming back on.
Oh, glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. Of course, glad to have you back. So with that being said, the title of this episode is the 100-year plan, or the goal of this episode is to really get an idea of what is the 100-year plan. And so what I mean by that is I refer to basically how the institutions need to be recaptured. Now, I might be jumping the gun here a little bit, but basically I think that in order for us to really recapture the American identity, recapture the American spirit, all these things that America first wants to accomplish, what really needs to happen is this full-blown takeover of all systems in America, all institutions, all corporations in America, that kind of vast and overcoming takeover. And I think a good point as to why this is very recently Donald Trump was, he got challenged by a district court judge who said you're obligated to pay out the foreign aid to all these places that you've been paying before. You can't just come in and do that, which Donald Trump absolutely has the right to do as the executive branch. But he's been challenged. Of course, they're going to challenge him anyway. But what's shocking is that the Supreme Court upheld this decision. So, Joe, I want to get your opinion on first off, I want to get your opinion on that news story. Had you heard about this?
Yeah, I had. Actually, I was listening to Wake Up Carolina this morning, and I kind of heard Ken Art's take on it. And I have to say, I do kind of agree with Ken's point that you can't pull the rug out of contracts that have been fulfilled. I think you have to go forward and say, okay, we're going to invalidate or we're going to cancel any contracts that haven't been fulfilled. And not knowing the details of it, if people actually fulfilled the contract and did the work, I guess it's kind of bad form to not pay them for things that have already been done. Which is why, Rome wasn't built in a day. These are the kinds of examples that will start the momentum. It's kind of like this is the snowball that becomes the huge, gigantic snowball rolling down the hill. But it's got to start with one issue. Okay, we will pay for a contract that's been fulfilled, but we won't sign the next one, and we won't pay the next one, and we will cancel the next one on things that we don't think are in the best interests of American taxpayers.
Right. So on that note, because I think you raised a good point, and actually you referenced Wake Up Carolina, the show that I work for full time this morning, and in the moment, I did not agree with Ken's idea that we had to pay out these contracts. And I said, you know what, it's war, drastic times calls for drastic measures. We have to do what we have to do. And I do think there is a mandate for that right now. Now, the more I've thought about it, the more I've kind of pondered this issue, I will say that I do think you're right. Like, a lot of these contracts have been fulfilled, and it would be basically a good faith payment to kind of pay them out. However, this kind of goes to the problem that I think we ultimately have, which is you see this all the time where the Democrats push and push and push, and they get what they want. they deem that homosexuality is constitutional. Their Supreme Court gives them whatever they want. Like the Supreme Court, even Trump, I blame Trump. He picked these judges who are basically moderates. I blame him for that totally. But I think that like Trump is almost a creation of these institutions. He said it. He's benefited from the kind of tax problems, from the kind of things, that the institutions allow. And he came in to drain the swamp, to overturn those things. So I think that basically what we've seen with Donald Trump is Donald Trump was a populist leader. We're so used to these managers, but like the problem is the system that is being managed. It's not simply a mismanagement thing. It's a systematic propulsion of the system itself, to where, yes, you can have the system screw up things so bad, it creates this tension, it creates this vacuum that a figure like Donald Trump ultimately fulfills. But what happens? He gets in and they subvert him at all costs, all these creatures of the institutions. So we've referred to this on my show many times as the 100-year plan, where we need to start thinking about not winning today, not winning 4 years from now, not winning this next election or the election after that or the election after that, but rather the elections 100 years from now. Because I think inherent in some of these like Democrat policies and some of these foreign policies is almost their own destruction. But we can't really rely on that. Do you kind of get what I'm saying here?
I do. And I think the three branches of government is both our strength and our weakness. It's like it's the opposite side of the same coin. The fact that we have these checks and balances serve us very well. But I think it prevents us from making quick turns. It prevents us from moving as quickly as probably you and I would like to. And that's just inherent in the system. I think you can't celebrate the Constitution and you can't celebrate, a republic type form of government and then complain that the checks and balances of the Supreme Court don't go fast enough or don't go exactly the way you want it. I think a 100-year journey begins with one step. And a lot of what we're seeing are the first steps of this transformation of America. And it is kind of messy. This is a good example of you win two, you lose one. And so the progress is going to be made, but we probably won't fulfill the vision that you're talking about for America all at once. It's going to be a gradual building process, and there are going to be fights along the way. And as Ken was mentioning, he does think that the Supreme Court, the conservative, moderate Supreme Court, of which Donald Trump appointed a number of members, he thinks eventually they will give him the quasi line item veto on expenses that he doesn't approve of. The executive office will eventually get to veto congressional appointments or congressional appropriations. But it's probably going to be that landmark decision in a year or so that is a result of a big old fight to get there.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I mean, personally, I think it's just corruption. I think I won't get too into the specifics. I do think there are parties that are not only they were interested in Trump getting in. So I think that I think Trump was allowed to get in a second time. I don't think it was too big to rig. I think they could handle it if they wanted to, which is concerning. Because like I've said before, I think the Trump didn't capture the institution. The institutions captured Trump. He's one man. And that's kind of the problem we're really getting at here. And this is a big thing. So like we talk about like, oh, well, we'll think about the presidency. And then people say, well, it's so much bigger than the presidency. We have to get the Senate and we have to get Congress, which is true. But that's about as far as a lot of people are willing to go. I think that we need to get obviously they'll even say this. We need to get the education, so not just the colleges, not just the Ivy League schools, but even at the local level. We need to recapture those, and we need to recapture. I think one of the most important of all is Hollywood. I think Hollywood has been an absolute influence in the degradation of the moral fabric of society. And it's up to us to basically, over the next century, infiltrate back into these institutions and redirect them into the direction. Because society, at the end of the day, the masses, society, they're ultimately directed. The society is directed by its leaders, not the other way around. As much as we'd like to say that. You know, in a democratic society, we say, "Oh, well, you know, it's the people's republic. It's this, it's that. It's the people decide." Not really. When they never get what they want from their elected leaders who ran on the things they wanted, when the moral fabric of society is being steered away from Christ and towards, you know, homosexuality and all these anti-Christ things through Hollywood, through television and this kind of stuff. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, and that's kind of one of the main differences between leaders and managers. Okay, managers motivate people, but they motivate people with kind of the carrot and the stick. Oh, if you'll do this, I'll give you this incentive. If you don't do this, you're going to get fired. And when you are being motivated by managers, it's all quid pro quo. I'll do this if I get that. The difference is that as soon as you stop with the reward or the punishment, then what happens is the behavior just reverts back. Leaders, on the other hand, inspire people to do things of their own free will. And if you're inspired, you're not doing it out of fear or incentive, you're doing it out of desire. And I think if, in fact, Donald Trump is going to prove to be the leader that we hope he is, you know, based on some historical references, well, then that inspiration is going to happen slowly but surely. Each generation is going to say, you know what, I'm going to make a movie about that, or I'm going to start a company about that, or I'm going to be more patriotic about this. And so that is a very slow process, but that cannot be taken away from them. Okay? If you stop with the incentive bonuses, I stop selling. If I want to sell because I believe that this is the answer to someone's problem, then I'm doing it out of love and passion as opposed to guilt or fear. And I think that's why we may view Donald Trump in the same leadership category as some of the other historical figures. But the point is, we're not going to know that right away. We'll know a little bit in 4 years. You know, if people get on board during the midterms, we'll know a little bit more. If a MAGA president replaces Trump in 28, we'll know a little bit more. So if we see the majorities in the House and in the Senate become super majorities before 2030, then we'll kind of see it. But it's not a magic wand kind of thing. It's really one soul at a time. And you know, in many ways, I see the classic leadership model as Christ. You know, he came in, you know, as a Jew in a Jewish-led land, and slowly but surely converted a big portion of the world. You know, 2 billion people over 2,000 years, and it's still going strong. And so if America is going to ever become MAGA 100 years from now, you know, that's going to build forward gradually, slowly, but it's not going to go back. That's the true measure of leadership, if people do not revert back the moment they get the chance.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, because we've talked before on the show about the distinction between leadership and management. And this is a very important thing, because we're talking about managers. You talk a lot about managers in leadership roles.
Yes.
And I think that basically, and this was a point we hit on before, is the majority of people might be well, like when you just break it down to leaders and managers, not everyone's qualified to be a manager. Maybe
Right.
even like less than half of the population is qualified to be a manager.
That's right.
But you will definitely find more people qualified to be managers than more people qualified to be leaders.
Exactly. Yes. Management used to be that a very good manager would become a leader almost automatically. But since the 1960s, we've seen a division in the skill set of managers versus leaders. There's a famous line that says, managers do things right, leaders do the right thing. And so it takes a lot more effort to convert a world to a different religion or to convert a democracy to make America great again. That's a lot harder than it is to balance a budget. Even though you're right, only 25% of the people can make a six-figure income as a manager. To be responsible for 10 people, to be responsible for $1 million budget, to be responsible for a year calendar, that takes a lot of planning, organizing, decision-making skills. But to truly inspire people to change the way they think, feel, and believe, that's a different set of abilities. And we can talk about someday what has happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that necessitated that leadership be separated from management. There are some good reasons. There's the women's liberation. There's the globalization. There's the equal opportunity amendment legislation. There's a complete change in immigration. All those things have made the normal skills of management insufficient to be leaders. And so leadership is even more rare than management and even more rare than it was. And that's why it's really, really hard to do something like Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King or, set a vision. Even Adolf Hitler, he was a leader for evil and his vision was evil, but he was talking about 1,000-year reign, right? Mm-hmm. He said, my Reich is going to last for 1,000 years. So he wasn't doing this just for his lifetime. He saw a wholesale change in how Germany should operate. And that's been true of a lot of the leaders that we refer to historically. And we won't really know that with Trump, for 100 years.
No, yeah, you're right. And that's something that really needs to be addressed. And, we say some controversial things on this. So that's why I'm against the type of democracy we have now, where the politicians are basically beholden to a rabid and selfish base that's only concerned with what do I get today? What do I get right now? Not looking out for the future generations. They say they do, but they really aren't. They're pick your poison. It could be any group. It's whites, it's blacks, it's boomers, it's young people, Gen Z, whatever you want to call it. They're all looking out for themselves. And what does this cause? This behavior began, I would say, selfishness has been around forever, but you began to see it sort of en masse post World War II, I think. And it basically, sort of behavior became the norm. And we're experiencing the defects of that, the issues that arises today. It doesn't happen instantaneously. It takes a little bit of time to catch up. The symptoms take time to catch up with the cause of the disease.
Exactly.
And that's why, we've talked recently on Wake Up Carolina a lot about Social Security and how that's a big problem. And it needs to, Donald Trump's not going to get in there, nor should he. Even I won't advocate for him cutting Social Security for people that are currently on it or people that are about to be on it. It's in any system. You could be Adolf Hitler, you could be Joseph Stalin. If you do that, it is not politically expedient. Being an authoritarian doesn't really matter at that point.
Yeah.
But I've begun to accept the fact I probably will never get to see my Social Security. I've already paid into it, of course. It's not as much as someone like you, but I'm paying into it, and I've just accepted the fact that money is currently burning. Like, it's probably being stored somewhere right now, but I will never see it. Are the people my age going to be on board that train? I don't think so. And that's a big problem we see with this sort of system, which is why the hearts of the people need to be redirected. And you're seeing this movement now against shame, against all forms of shame. And I think shame is actually a good thing to have. It's bad to be ashamed about the wrong things. It's good to be ashamed about the right things. And you know what I mean by that. Like, if you cheat on your wife and nobody knows, but you feel bad about that.
Yeah.
That's a good thing to feel.
It's what we used to talk about as your conscience. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Josh, since we can't look, 100 years into the future, one thing we might look at is 100 years into the past with regard to Social Security. Okay, we're dealing with the problem of Social Security now, but the reason we are is because 100 years ago, it was not structured properly. Our $37 trillion debt did not just happen now. It's been building up over the last 75 years. And so I think if you want to see a system that is a disaster in the present, look at how it was handled in the past. And so, past is prologue, okay? If we don't approach things differently, we're going to have these problems 100 years from now. Mm-hmm. So to your point, right, if we do approach things differently, if we do approach things radically, if we get out of our heads and bodies and get into our hearts and souls, maybe we can change our human nature, because management is quite often a function of human nature. Leadership is a little bit more akin to divine nature in the fact that you're not thinking in the short term, you're not thinking of yourself, you're a little bit more unselfish, right? I'm not thinking about my taxes right now. I'm thinking about my children's and grandchildren's ability to pay. Mm-hmm. And so that is a leadership thought, to be concerned about the future generations. It's a management thought to think about, what I'm doing this weekend and how I need as much money as possible to party.
Yes, 100%. And I think an important, something you said there that kind of, it triggered like a thought in me, which is basically like, I'm thinking, the system is so complex. And the system, I mean like the swamp, all of the government, Hollywood, the schools, everything. And the only way, like, you can't organize the amount of people it takes to recapture those institutions. You can't organize them under the banner of a singular group that is beholden to one or several individuals. Like, it is going to take changing the people's hearts and minds in order to facilitate that sort of takeover, which is why I think that actually what we're doing right now is extremely important. And, everyone says that, but I think that this is where I disagree with Kennard on Wake Up Carolina. He talks a lot about, because, he's a politician. I think he's a fantastic politician, a natural born one. And honestly, I think we're worse off for the fact that he was basically kicked out of politics. Yeah. But I think that where he and I disagree is essentially, he talks about how we're like in specifically in relation to radio. We're not in the business of changing minds. We're in the business of advertising. And he's looking at it from a purely business perspective. When he says that, he's true. Nothing he said is incorrect, but I do think it's the wrong mentality to have. I didn't get into broadcasting. I didn't get into conservative political talk radio because I wanted to make $1 million. It's because I think that this is there's many things that need to happen to recapture the Constitution or sorry, so the institutions. I don't believe that I'm capable enough to be a congressman or a senator. I do think I'm a eloquent speaker. I do think I have a good showmanship presence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that this is actually where I belong. And I am here to change people's minds. So, and I'm not talking about specifically me. I think Ken is a even more effective speaker. I think Ken is better than me. I don't think, however, he says, well, you're young, you'll get better. And that's true. But I think doing what he does, he's a natural at it. He is a pro. And I'm not sure I could ever get to that level. And I mean that as a compliment to him.
Yeah.
So think about how effective he would be if he were on the same page. And that's exactly my point, is what we're doing right now, this discussion we're having, will hopefully, if we reach enough people, it will have a profound effect on the next generation. And then the people that are effective speakers in that generation, the people that would be effective leaders in that generation, their minds will be changed based on what we said. And that will have this resounding effect. And it's only really under the banner of Christ can this kind of change be initiated.
I agree. I talk about the book a lot, Jesus Christ CEO, and leaders need to kind of emulate his behavior. Okay. And, Christ's behavior was in service to others. There's also a great book called Servant Leadership. And so there are three things that can happen with regarding to change. There are transactions. Hey, I want a Slurpee. Here's $2. Give me my Slurpee. That's a transaction. A transition is when we move on from the Biden-Harris administration to the Trump-Vance administration. That's a transition. But a transformation is when we do, in fact, change the hearts and minds of people. When people say, you know what? I'm going to follow Jesus Christ. That's a transformation. I'm going to follow Adolf Hitler. That's a transformation, albeit a bad one. Okay? So if I, who was raised a Democrat and weaned on NPR and NBC, and I'm in academia, and I'm somewhat of a conservative academic, well, maybe somehow in my classes I will inspire some other people to follow me into conservative academia, not progressive liberal academia. And maybe someone like who's listening to you will go into media and speak of more conservative issues. And maybe there'll be more Christian broadcasting, or there'll be more Christian media or Christian podcasts. And so that has to happen little by little. So where the media is transformed from wacko left, liberal, progressive, to moderate, to conservative. Same thing with other institutions like education. You go to Hillsdale College, it's not just a progressive liberal education. It's a constitutionally based America First kind of education. So one of the things that the disciples had in following Christ and spreading the word was a tremendous faith and belief in his message. And the leaders have the vision. The leaders see into the future about what can be. And it's the managers who have the mission to carry out that vision. So, Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance and Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running for the governorship of Ohio, and Byron Donalds, who's running for the governorship of Florida. These are the disciples who are being put in place to facilitate the transformation. But, transformation isn't like Superman where you go into the phone booth and you change. That's a transaction.
Right.
We need hearts and minds to look at things differently. And unfortunately, that is a slow process. But you need the faith to keep going.
Yes. I think that is the most important thing, because with all things in history, it never, as long as it's just us, and I don't mean but basically what I mean is until God comes back, until the end of days, where God is obviously like fully in control and we're all, taken up to heaven and judged and whatnot, as long as we're still here, as long as we're still the ones in charge, so to speak, there will always be shifts. Even the devil, who's the ruler of this world, can't avoid this. A lot of people think like, oh, when they started to see this sort of transgender movement pop around 2015, it could only go downhill from here. And that's what I thought too at the time. But then the more I realized, I was like, you know what? I'm not actually as concerned about the transgender movement. I will speak out against it. I'm not pro-transgender. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean is the people are actually more moderate. And their tastes, their preference are not, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not like fixed in a direction. So the truth is, at the end of the day, God prefers us to be, he doesn't want us cold. He doesn't want us lukewarm. He wants us hot. You do need to be a radical Christian. You do need to, abstain from sex before marriage. All this stuff no one likes to do. All this important stuff. Don't steal even when you're a little kid, candy from the liquor shop, or whatever, candy store. But the point being is like the masses can be influenced, as I was saying earlier. So you saw this sort of like, man, these, like in the 60s, there's like all these crazy Christians, they're paranoid, whatever. We just wanted to have love, man. It's all love, it's all fun. And so you see this swing towards degradation. But then you get, of course, as always, you're going to get people that take it too far. You're going to get the rampant homosexuals and then transgenders. But the truth is that that's like way too far. People aren't naturally murderers. You know what I mean? If it was like, oh, everyone kills somebody, people wouldn't stand for that. So then what do you see? You're starting to see this swing back. I'm actually seeing a lot of people that are like comedians. Comedians are almost given this like high status these days. It's like they're like the modern day philosophers. They are like, they're not Christian, but they're not anti-Christian like they were for so long. You know what I mean? And so we're in an opportunity where we need to capitalize on that right now, because we talk, this whole episode's about a 100-year journey. What about the people born 50 years from now that didn't experience the transgender movement like we did? We need to be thinking about, stop fighting the issues of your youth. Fight the issues of today.
But those fights really do form foundational pillars for the future. Just like we might refer to Thomas Jefferson or Abraham Lincoln. We might refer to Teddy Roosevelt or even FDR. Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. And so I think in some ways, these small voices, these lone voices in some cases, will be the grain of sand that the pearl is built on in the oyster shell. And I think one of the things you had mentioned earlier about shame, if you think about the greatest generation, when I think about my grandparents and my parents, I think there was much more humility. There was much more shame. Now, granted, they're a product of Catholic upbringing, so, guilt is the currency of Italian Catholicism. But, some of those things were in very healthy doses. They were able to defer gratification. They thought of something bigger than themselves. They feared Judgment Day, okay? And I think what's happened, maybe since the 60s, since the peace, love, and free sex, drugs, and rock and roll, since even the Jesus freaks, the hippies, this anything goes mandate, I think has really confused the generations that followed. I'm at the end of baby booming, but I've been teaching millennials and Gen Xers and Gen Yers and even Gen Zers, and I have seen the gradual, slow degradation of the idea that there's something beyond today. There's something beyond my own egocentricity. It's gradually eroded. to the point where we're almost kind of hitting rock bottom, which is why I see, the pendulum of this broadcast, right? When the pendulum starts going in the other direction, that's where we can really add something to the transformation in a little way. We're not going to have the impact that Trump is going to. We're not going to have the impact that the Supreme Court is. But, remember that famous story about the kid picking up the starfish, throwing them back in the ocean when they were all stranded on the shore? And some guy says, "What are you doing? You're wasting your time. You'll never be able to throw all those starfish back. You're not going to be able to save all those starfish. What are you doing that? It doesn't matter." And the kid says, "It matters to this one. He's saving one or two starfish at a time." And that's a very frustrating, impatient, intolerant kind of exercise. But is that any different than the people who suffered for teaching what Christ was teaching? Is that any different than preparing for this show and hoping that, someone gets inspired? It's Christ's work. It's MAGA's work. It's idealism's work, whatever it is. We're the kind of people that think it's worth it. But we're up against the odds of the media and the academics who basically said, live for today, just worry about yourself. It's the me decade, and the future be damned. Boy, that's had a lot of momentum. That's had 50 good years of momentum, and to turning that around, it's like turning around an aircraft carrier. You turn off the engine of an aircraft carrier, it doesn't stop for a mile. And so for us to change these movements, it's going to be slow and painful, but I'm on board.
That's actually a really good analogy. I like that analogy of an aircraft carrier because I grew up and my parents had a boat and they taught me how to drive it, and it's very difficult. It's not like a car,
right,
where it's not on a fixed track, but it's like you can start on a dime, stop on a dime for the most part. The steering is very controlled. On boats, it's a whole different story.
Yeah.
The boat does not stop moving. There's no brakes, and so that's an excellent point where it's like it's had this crazy momentum shift. Now we've got to swing it back the other way.
Yeah.
And I think something you said earlier that kind of spoke out to me was the long-term effects of these institutions. So basically, like we've been emphasizing, it's going to be a long haul to get these things done. And we need to foster the next generation in order to do that, but it takes sacrifice. And so, you and I and Zeb have talked behind the scenes about kind of forming this little coalition or organization. We're working on this sort of big project with now other people are involved. And one of the other people, his name is Chuck Mason, I think.
Oh, yeah. I saw his video.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's made a couple videos that I've really been enjoying them. And one of the things he talked about was how forever, people were involved in their local politics. People went to school board meetings. People went to the city council meetings. People were involved in the affairs of their small town. And really en masse, that kind of fell off in the 50s and 60s. And who filled the gap? It was all these begrudged groups, minority groups, Black Americans. They filled in the gaps. Like a certain type of woman filled in the gap. And you look at videos from city council meetings nowadays, and it's all this yapping, it's all this and it's all this discombobulation, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
A decohesion. And that's who's been allowed to sort of capture the movement or capture just everything, all of the institutions, and they're steering it in a direction that is not productive, which is why people like us, people if you're a millionaire is almost not concerned with going to a school board meeting, but they should be. Everyone should be invested in that, and it's going to take that kind of mentality. It's going to take that kind of force to get the country back on what it is. It's not unlike the metaphor of the ship, which just has a wheel, to direct the state. We're on a ship that has thousands of wheels, and we need to get enough people steering in the right direction. And that's the kind of effort and momentum we need to get people's mindset towards.
But when I think about this, 5 years ago, I was having some of these thoughts, and I really had no one to talk to. Then I started listening to Wake Up Carolina. Then I met you. Then we met Zeb. So in a very short time, the impact of some of my thoughts has been incredibly magnified by like souls. And so, if you think about it, right, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16. I mean, the logarithmics of it all can really multiply quickly. It's really hard to get started, but once it gets going, we can have the same effect that the negative transformations had the 60s and 70s and 80s. And so, I'm very optimistic and hopeful. I have children who are going to inherit whatever we inherit, but you have to decide whether the things that are out there are worth it. Are the policies that Trump's making is worth it? Did you get to see the State of the Union the other night?
I've seen bits and pieces of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a classic example. The fact that the Democrats could not applaud or stand up for a cancer child, a child with cancer, or couldn't acknowledge a woman who got brain damage from a transgender volleyball player, or you couldn't acknowledge Laken Riley's parents. The fact that they are so impetuous that they would protest something that's anti-American is really shocking. So if they do that in the chambers of the Congress, well, what can you expect in the school board meeting? People are going to act like crazy, like Al Green, and get thrown out and get censured and all this other kind of stuff. So people have just decided that they can do whatever the heck they please without shame, without consequence. And of course, to believers, Judgment Day is the big consequence, right? This earth's judgment doesn't matter compared to the eternal judgment. And that's why I think the people who are not God-fearing are not necessarily playing with a full deck. If you believe that there's no consequences from your action for your creator or your maker, I think that's kind of reckless and irresponsible to think that, you just become maggot food when you die. And, maybe we're suffering a problem of too much agnosticism or atheism as well to combat this issue. But, I think you got to have a God-fearing attitude to kind of be willing to do some of this work.
I think you're absolutely right. To your point about agnosticism and atheism, that movement was very small to begin with. It was being pushed a lot in the early 2000s, especially after 9/11.
Yeah.
Even I remember that, where being an atheist was considered cool almost, but even that's kind of fallen off because people quickly, and this is, the word, the law of God is written on all of our hearts. And I do think that there is this sort of I say natural law, but I really mean because we are spirit, a spirit natural law that basically there's something spiritually deadening about the belief that this is all pointless. If a different sperm cell reached the egg before the one that it is me did, and it would be someone else, it's inconsequential. It doesn't matter. I think that is deadening to people. And some people, they believe they're smart enough to deal with it. I'm so concerned with truth. And I do believe they believe it, but the majority of people, they just sense that there's something wrong with that and they're drawn away. And I think that's a good thing. You know what I mean? And I definitely believe that, like you were saying, this sort of mentality, I believe at the end of the day, we're going to win because we're on God's side and God's going to win. In terms of these battles, we absolutely have the potential to, but we need to activate people. And I think that, funny enough, seeing the Democrats not stand up for a kid who beat cancer, for for like the victims, the parents of a victim of rape and murder from an illegal immigrant. That actually is good for us.
Oh, yeah.
Because it makes them look terrible. So I hope they keep it up, but eventually I think that we have an opportunity to foster this hunger towards like true Christ-centered conservatism.
But see, you make a very good point, because these people in Congress, they are not stupid people. They have good intelligence, right? They have a position. They have elected. Their body is in Washington, D.C. So their body and their mind is really pretty much high-level society. They're elected federal officials. Wow, something to aspire to. But what don't they have? The Spirit. They are missing the hearts and souls of what it means to be human in the world. And I have often said that I believe the discipline of politics is by definition a managerial job. To manage a political campaign, to manage a political career really doesn't have anything to do with the classical definitions of leadership. I think it's almost antithetical to leadership, which is why we're fond of saying that Donald Trump was not a politician. He was a businessman. The difference is, I think Donald Trump is a businessman who he got religion. It's kind of like he realized, how many more buildings do I need? How much more money do I need? How much more golf do I need to play? I need to do something bigger, like the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, some of those robber barons. Before they died, they said, at least let me make up for whatever I did to get rich. And so I think Trump has really seen the light, and he's transitioned beyond manager, the manager of Trump Organization, to the leader of the country. And that's why I think he has the potential to demonstrate the classical definitions of leadership. He is inspiring other people to change the way they live, to change what they believe, to put aside their physical and mental needs for something greater than themselves, to leave the world a better place than they found it, to support and nurture ideas, not just bank accounts.
I think you raise a really good point. And this is something I've said about Donald Trump before. It's something that Ken and I debated on Wake Up Carolina, is he thinks, well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm recalling a specific back and forth that Ken and I had. And he said he thinks that it's about ego with Trump, where Trump he's been the top dog since the 80s. He's winning in television. He's winning in New York real estate. He's got his name in lights. What's the next thing I could have? Oh, I want to be the president before I die. And I believe that you're actually kind of right, where I think as almost all people do, they have this sort of like moment where they're like, wow, I'm getting older. I've got kids that are going to like outlive me. Do I even have 20 years left in the tank? You know what I mean? And they have this moment and they say, what really have I done that's going to leave an impact? I've done plenty for me, but what's going to happen for the next people? And, it's not my place to question anyone's faith, but I don't think that Trump was, for the most of his life, truly a Christian. I don't even think he was professing to be.
He wasn't a leader, for sure.
Certainly. And I think you're right, where he had this sort of moment. And, hopefully he did have a literal come to Jesus moment. But I think for the sake of metaphor, I think whether he's Christian or not is besides the point. But he did have this sort of like, what am I leaving for the next generation moment? But I think that comes with that is like when a person comes to Jesus, they're not like on the same level of experience as a Christian as someone who's been Christian for many years. Yeah. So I think he had this almost like spiritual immaturity. And he thought the best solution for his problem was to run for president. And I agree. But what happened? the people that are after the president are not on the same page. So he, by the very nature of running for president, was just surrounded with people. He said himself, he almost never stayed in Washington. He was not involved in Washington at all, being a New York real estate mogul. So what happens? All these people that he's not familiar with come flooding to him because now he's the president. And they are, and he's basically, because he's in a state of spiritual immaturity, he's seeking counsel, but who he's getting it from are the wrong people, which is why I think we've seen a change in him. His heart is in the right place, but I think his intentions, his goals have been manipulated.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. It's almost like in Washington, the Last Supper is 11 Judases and 1 Thomas.
Yeah.
So that's what he's dealing with. But, contrasting his come to Jesus moment versus with Joe Biden. See, I don't think Joe Biden ever had a moment. Joe Biden maintained that thuggery, maintained that egocentricity, maintained that obsession with his own self right till the end. And so, again, I understand what you're saying. I really hate to judge other people's faith or even their motivations, but better late than never. It's kind of like the guy who's been working at the soup kitchen, helping people for 30 years in his local community. He's doing a lot of good missionary work. Trump doesn't have that option. But maybe he's thinking the best I could do is have one major impact. Let me do what I can. I can't save every starfish, but I can inspire people to go out and save starfish. So what I like about Trump is I think he's been honest and real. He's accepted his flaws and his foibles, but he's trying to make the best of what he can do now. He can't change the past, but he seems to be all in to leave a legacy that will be, worthy of Mount Rushmore, as opposed to Nancy Pelosi, who thought Joe Biden belongs up there. What a yin and yang between the Biden administration and this. Even if Trump isn't perfect, even if he's got a lot of work to do, even if he has too many Judases in his cabinet,
I like that.
It's still a lot better than it was.
I like that. The Last Supper with 11 Judases and 1 Peter or Thomas.
Yeah, one Peter or Thomas.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
But I think with that, I think that's a good note to end on. I think we covered the kind of necessity for this forward thinking, for this political activism at the local level, and even Trump's intentions behind doing this. And I hope that, as you do, I hope that Trump will be an effective, pillar for the next generations to build on.
That's right. And you and I just keep our head to the, nose to the grindstone and keep trying to do what we can little by little.
All right, boss man.
Thank you, man.
Well, again, thank you for coming on.
Great to be here. Thanks, Josh.
And before we go, I just want to announce, Zeb is gone, so we've been light on broadcast this week. I was going to do one yesterday, but I had a little medical problem. We did manage to do one today. Forgive the wonky camera work and whatnot. I'm not as good as Zeb is on that. And I was going to do one with Rodney Berry tomorrow, but there was some miscommunication, so he's actually going to be out of town. So I'm going to be working today to get some clips up. But yeah, those are just some kind of announcements for the rest of the week. But starting Monday, I don't think we're going to be doing anything live Monday, but Zeb will be back, and we'll be back to our normal sort of broadcast routine. So thank you for watching Outside the Overton. I'm Joshua Vandernoord. Thank you again for coming, Joe. And we'll see you guys soon.
Great. Thank you.